Hello everyone, Jacob here. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about this structure, would verb if subject verb object, which in Korean means 뭐뭐뭐 했으면 뭐뭐 했을거야. So we're going to be talking about this kind of conditional tense. It's called the conditional tense in English, 했을거야. In English, we say would verb, all right? Or even we could say could verb, but that we're going to talk about in the next video. So today, let's stay focused on this structure, would verb if subject verb object is used to talk about a conditional. You could say conditional, or you could even just say kind of a possible situation in the future. All right. And the reason I want to explain this is because when I ask my students questions like, if you had a lot of money, what would you do? Or if you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do? People tend to forget that they have to use this structure in these kinds of situations where I'm asking a conditional, or you could even say hypothetical question, something that isn't really a real question. I'm asking you to imagine kind of what you would do in these kinds of situations. All right, so let's look at our first example, which is actually quite straightforward. I would move to Hawaii. I would move to Hawaii if I had a lot of money. I would move to Hawaii if I had a lot of money. I like living in Korea, but I think Hawaii is a little bit nicer. So I would move to Hawaii if I had a lot of money. So what are we doing here? We're using this would verb, would move in this case, if I had a lot of money. So something that you need to be careful about when you're using this structure is that in this part right here, you want to make sure that the verb is using the past tense, if I had, not if I have, all right? So that is important. It's like in Korean, you say 뭐뭐 했으면 뭐뭐 했을 거야, not 뭐뭐 하면 뭐뭐 했을 거야. Usually, anyway. Depends a little bit on the situation, but in general, in this kind of sentence, you have to use the past right here. All right. So what does this mean? I would move to Hawaii. 하와이로 이사 갔을 거야. If I had a lot of money. 돈이 많았으면. All right. So that is pretty easy, not too hard. And again, here, what am I doing? I'm imagining kind of, what I would do if I had a lot of money. I'm imagining that situation, that conditional or even possible situation in the future. All right. So that is basically where we want to use this, this would verb if subject verb object structure. But there are other cases or kind of other usages of this structure, and I want to talk about those in our next couple of examples. So what's our second example? If America were safer, so here I'm starting the sentence with if, which is fine. You can put it kind of in the second part, or you can put it in the first part of the sentence. It doesn't matter. All right. If America were safer, people wouldn't buy guns. Okay, so again, here we are using the structure wouldn't buy. In this case, it's negative, so this means 안 샀을 거야. If you want to make it negative, you have to say wouldn't if America were safer. All right, so here we're using this kind of weird tense were, which is only used for conditional, but you could also just say was. I think a lot of people, especially when they're speaking, they just say was, just regular past tense. Even though it's not maybe technically correct, it's very common, so I don't think you really need to worry about this too much. Either way is okay, were or was. You don't want to say if America is safer, okay, because that just sounds weird. So if America were safer, people wouldn't buy guns. So what am I doing here? Again, I'm kind of imagining the situation where, America is kind of safe. I'm imagining this kind of conditional or possible situation in the future. But I'm also just kind of explaining, why people in America buy guns. Well, it's not very safe in America, so people think that they need guns to protect themselves. Koreans always ask me, why do Americans have so many guns? It's scary, it's bad. But, and I try and explain, well, if America were safer, like Korea, if America were really, really safe, like Korea, people probably wouldn't buy guns. All right, so here I'm explaining kind of why people buy guns. So this is a very, very useful structure, not just to imagine, these kinds of conditional or possible situations in the future, but also we use it to explain, okay? And there's one more way that I think I use it a lot, and that's to give someone advice. So let's look at our third example. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Okay, so this is actually just a really, really useful phrase that you should probably just memorize because it's used in a lot of different situations. And again, here we're using the same structure. Wouldn't, verb, if I were you. All right, here again, you could say if I was you, but we usually say if I were you. It's more correct. Anyway, so what does this mean? Well, technically this means 내가 너라면 뭐뭐뭐 안 했을 거야. 내가 너라면 안 했을 거야. All right? But I think in Korean you would probably just say 나라면 안 했을 거야. Okay? And you could say that even in English. You could say if it was me, I wouldn't do that. But often we'll say this, I wouldn't do that if I were you. When you want to give someone advice, you're basically telling someone, I don't really think you should do that. All right, so you could even kind of interpret this as, don't do that. And sometimes you'll see this in movies. People will say, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And what they're really saying, they're not really giving advice. It's like they're warning them. They're saying, don't do that. Otherwise, something bad will happen. I will do something bad to you. All right, so this is actually just a really good phrase that I would memorize and try and use in those kinds of situations. All right, so we've now seen, kind of different ways of using this would verb if subject verb object structure, not just to kind of imagine these possible but maybe unlikely situations, but also maybe you could use it to explain something, or you could even use it a lot when you want to try and give someone some advice. All right, so that is basically all that I wanted to say in this lesson. Try and remember, especially if someone asks you, a question like I said before, if you had a lot of money, if you were rich, if the world ended today, what would you do? Then please try to remember to use this structure, because if you forget, it makes your English sound kind of bad. All right? I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I hope you understood everything, and I will see you next time.